before Smoke on the Water rattled the walls of the casino of Montreux, before Ian Gillan's scream shook arenas from Tokyo to Los Angeles, before Deep Purple stood shoulder to shoulder with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath as the architects of the heavy metal age, there was a manic drummer with a head full of acid and a vision nobody else fully understood. This is the story of how one of the greatest rock bands in history was born not from a garage rehearsal or a pub backroom, but from a revolving door, quite literally. The year was 1967. Britain was swinging, psychedelia was in the air, and Chris Curtis, the former drummer of the Searchers, one of the biggest beat groups of the early 1960s, was growing restless. The Searchers had been enormously successful, riding the same Mercy wave as the Beatles. Music and parties and laughter. But Curtis was a different breed of animal. Visionary, restless, and by most accounts, completely out of his mind in the most creative way possible. He'd grown tired of cover songs, tired of playing safe. He wanted something bigger, something that had never been done before. What he pitched to aspiring music manager Tony Edwards was this: a supergroup called Roundabout. Not a band in a conventional sense, but a rotating collective with a fixed core, where musicians could board and disembark like passengers on a musical merry-go-round. It was either genius or madness, possibly both. Curtis sealed the deal with a single line: Brian Epstein's dead, you can be the next Brian Epstein. Edwards was hooked. He brought in business partners John Coletta and Ron Heyer to form HEC Enterprises, and together they began financing Curtis's grand experiment. Nobody knew at the time that the men who started it all would be gone before the band even had a name. First real building block of what would become Deep Purple was Curtis's old flatmate, a classically trained pianist from Leicester named Jon Lord. Jon Lord was no ordinary rock keyboardist. He had studied piano from the age of 5, absorbed the Baroque structures of Bach with the same devotion other kids gave to football, and trained at the Central School of Speech and Drama. He'd paid his dues in the Art Woods, a respected blues outfit led by Ronnie Wood's brother Art, and by 1967, he was ready to push into new territory. He became the creative anchor of the project, but every anchor needs a blade, and that blade was about to arrive from Hamburg. Jon Lord was at the time performing in a backing band for the vocal group The Flower Pot Men. Alongside bassist Nick Simper. This bassist, Nick Simper, had known a young session guitarist in the early 1960s, a man who spent his teenage years haunting recording studios under the legendary Mercury producer Joe Meek, a man who'd taken classical guitar lessons for exactly 1 year before deciding electricity was more interesting. His name was Ritchie Blackmore. This guitarist, Ritchie Blackmore, was living in Germany, playing the Hamburg club circuit, the same route the Beatles had taken years before him. HEC Enterprises tracked him down, convinced him to fly to London, and arrange an audition at Curtis's flat. It went well. The chemistry between Lord and Blackmore was immediate and unmistakable. Two musicians from completely different schools, classical structure meeting raw, electrified instinct, and somehow they fit. But then came the foil incident. Curtis's erratic behavior, fueled by heavy LSD use, was escalating. Lord returned to their shared flat one day to find that Curtis had covered every surface in the entire apartment, the furniture, the walls, even the light bulbs, in aluminum foil. No explanation was offered, none was possible. Shortly after, HEC Enterprises quietly removed Chris Curtis from the equation. The man who had dreamed the whole thing up would never record a note with the band he created. Blackmore and Lord were now its heart. With management committed and two extraordinary musicians locked in, the pieces began falling into place. Simper stayed on bass, a drummer named Bobby Woodman joined temporarily, and in March 1968, the group moved to Deeves Hall, a country house in South Mimms, Hertfordshire, to live, write, breathe, and become a band. Tony Edwards went all in. Marshall amps stacked to the ceiling, a Hammond C3 organ for Lord, everything a band could need buried in the English countryside. Dozens of singers auditioned in that house, among them a young Rod Stewart, who didn't get the job. The man who did was Rod Evans, vocalist for a Midlands club band called The Maze. Evans had exactly the kind of smooth, soulful delivery the group's emerging sound demanded. And Evans came with a bonus: his band's 19-year-old drummer, Ian Paice. Blackmore had actually seen Paice perform in Germany 2 years earlier and had never forgotten it. The kid's speed and precision were jaw-dropping. When Woodman made clear he wasn't happy with the direction things were heading, Paice walked into an audition and walked out with a job. Evans got his too. The classic Mark I lineup, Lord, Blackmore, Simper, Evans, and Paice, was complete. The band embarked on a brief tour of Scandinavia in April 1968, still called Roundabout, but the name felt wrong. During rehearsals, musicians posted suggestions on a board: Orpheus, Sugar Lump, Concrete God, rejected as too harsh. Nothing landed. Then Ritchie Blackmore offered one more, Deep Purple, his grandmother's favorite song, a jazz standard from the 1920s by composer Peter DeRose. It was elegant, mysterious, it had weight, and it stuck. In May 1968, Deep Purple entered Paice Studios in London's Marble Arch with producer Derek Lawrence, an old associate of Blackmore's from the Joe Meek days. A shoestring budget and 3 days to make a record. Only 3 days. What emerged was Shades of Deep Purple, a debut album that wore its influences proudly. A lot of people said they sounded like Vanilla Fudge, that American band's technique of taking familiar songs and rebuilding them as slow, heavy, psychedelic monuments that had clearly gotten under the skin of everyone in that studio. Lord's classical training showed up everywhere, from Baroque keyboard runs to a prelude inspired by the Rimsky-Korsakov on the Skip James cover, I'm So Glad. His arrangement of Hey Joe folded in fragments of Manuel de Falla and the rolling pulse of Ravel's Bolero. Hey Joe. The album was, in its own strange way, a collision between the conservatory and the club. It also showed flashes of something harder and stranger. Mandrake Root rumbled with a Blackmore riff. Slows right down. Clearly indebted to Hendrix's Foxy Lady. And The Address, the instrumental opener, hinted at a band Deep Purple were about to become. The seeds of the heavy riff-driven machine were already buried in that debut, waiting to break through the soil. Then came Hush. Blackmore had heard the Joe South song while gigging in Germany and brought it to the band, convinced it was a hit. He was right, with Lord's Hammond organ driving it forward and Evans writing the melody with effortless cool. Hush was released in June 1968, and it detonated in North America. It peaked number 4 on the US Billboard Hot 100 and number 2 in Canada. The album followed it to number 24 on the Billboard charts. Deep Purple were overnight stars, but only in America. Back home in Britain, the story was different. Shades of Deep Purple arrived on UK shelves in September 1968 and vanished without a trace. Critics were dismissive. One reviewer called their sound a slow and pompous din. Others waved them off as a second-rate Vanilla Fudge knockoff. British venues wanted danceable numbers. Deep Purple famously told promoters, "We are not a dancing group." It didn't matter. In October 1968, they flew to North America and supported Cream on their farewell tour, playing the Inglewood Forum, appearing on Playboy After Dark, even showing up on The Dating Game. While Britain ignored them, America embraced them completely. Shades of Deep Purple was the starting gun for one of the most consequential careers in music history. It would be followed by 2 more albums with the Mark I lineup before the classic Mark II era: Gillan, Glover, Lord, Blackmore, Paice. We all know the Mark II with Deep Purple and Rock and Machine Head, and I'll do videos on them coming soon. But none of that would have happened without a flatmate with a foil-covered light bulb, without a grandmother's favorite song, without 3 days in London studio with a riff that was heavy before heavy had a name. The Roundabout had come full circle, and Deep Purple were just getting started. Check out this playlist of more Deep Purple album reviews. I will add more videos as I make them, but in the meantime, thanks for watching. Please like this video. Helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.